Hello everybody, we're just waiting till you all filter through, so do give us 10 to 15 seconds and we'll be back with this evening's event. Okay, great. So people are still coming through, but I think we can kick off. Good evening, everybody. My name is Niamh Gallagher. I'm one of the co-conveners of the Cambridge Future of the Island of Ireland series. This is our first event this calendar year. I know it's a little bit late in the year, but it's our first one. So welcome back to those of you who have been here before, and welcome to those of you who haven't joined us yet. So before introducing our speakers today, I want to take the opportunity to advertise our next event, which will happen on this day next week. So that's Monday, the 20th of March at 6 p.m. on Zoom. Our speaker will be Daniel Mulhall. He's former ambassador of Ireland to many different countries, including Great Britain and most recently the USA. He's also acted in that capacity in Berlin and Kuala Lumpur and has held a whole range of important diplomatic posts elsewhere. Dan will be speaking on Ireland's future multiverse, Northern Ireland, Britain, Europe and America. He will be asking a very vital question. Are we at a reboot or a refresh moment with regard to Ireland's international horizon? Dan is this year's Parnell Fellow in Irish Studies, which is a fellowship offered by Magdalen College in Cambridge, and he is the author of several books, the most recent being Ulysses, a Reader's Odyssey, published last year. He will be in conversation with Dr. Barry Colfer, who will be very familiar to those of you who tune into this series, our co-convener and currently research director at the Institute of International and European Affairs in Dublin. I think the link might have just gone out, but Iona will be circulating it via the chat function now. So please do make sure to register for what will be an exciting talk this day next week at 6 p.m. on Zoom. Okay, so turning our attention to this evening, we are delighted to welcome Ola Majekodunmi, who will speak on the theme of language, identity and diversity in Ireland. Ola was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and moved to Dublin when 7 months old. She's a broadcaster, an Irish language enthusiast, and a writer. She currently presents on Heard on RTE's 2XM, that's Ireland's national broadcaster, and one of its digital radio stations. Ola has directed and produced various video documentaries, including What Does Irishness Look Like in 2018, and that was screened at the Belfast Feminist Festival, and indeed many others as well. She's also produced the bilingual video documentary Say My Annam, great name, screened in the Irish Film Institute as part of Black History Month. And in 2019, she co-founded Beyond Representation, an initiative celebrating women of colour's achievements in arts, media and business. So Ola will be in discussion this evening with Professor Iarfhlaith Watson, Associate Professor of Sociology at UCD, University College Dublin. Professor Watson was head of the School of Sociology at UCD and president of the Sociological Association in Ireland. He's also held prominent positions for different bodies elsewhere too. His research and teaching focuses largely on the sociology of nations and national identity, but he holds a special interest in the sociology of the Irish language and Irish language broadcasting, publishing on these themes. So in our usual format, Ola will speak today for up to 20 minutes, followed by a discussion with Iarfhlaith for a similar length of time. The floor will then be open to questions, which I'll ask you to please submit via the Q&A function you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So please use that one as opposed to the chat function. If I can also encourage you to please submit your questions while we are speaking. I won't interrupt them, we're hopeful in that fact, but it's good to have those questions ready to go once we enter the Q&A portion of the event tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome our speakers this evening to the Cambridge Future of the Island of Ireland series, and I'm handing straight over to Ola. So over to you, Ola. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Niamh, for this opportunity. It's a privilege and an honour to be invited here today for this seminar, and I'm really looking forward to the later discussion with Iarfhlaith as well. But to give you a little bit of a background about myself, so I am an Irish speaker. I am a broadcaster, writer, and producer as well. And I suppose across the board in my work, what I'd like really to get out there, I suppose, is that I want to enhance the voices of minorities on this island. And I want there to be a voice for the voiceless. I think for myself, growing up in Ireland, I didn't always have a voice myself. I didn't always feel comfortable to speak about issues around race that I feel very comfortable to speak about today. So I hope that we in Ireland and elsewhere kind of really open up a discussion around these ideas, because it is essential to speak about this. You know, Ireland is a growing multicultural nation. And I suppose for a lot of people, there is yet an acceptance of that. I don't think everyone has yet accepted it in the country. And this is a growth that happened the end of the 90s. My parents themselves, they came to Ireland in 1997. You know, at the time, Ireland was a very different country. I think the general consensus at the time, to be honest, was that why are these immigrants coming to this country? Because, you know, the kind of, I suppose, general consensus in Ireland at the time was that people were leaving the country. They weren't coming in. So it was a real shock, I suppose, to the Irish people. But gradually, I think people have maybe tolerated rather than accepted immigrants. I think we're getting to that acceptance. And, you know, every day when I see people like the athlete Rashida Adeleke, you know, flying the flag for Ireland in the athletic scene, it's amazing. It just shows that people of African descent, people from different various ethnic minority backgrounds are doing amazing things in Ireland. And we only want to add to the country. We don't want to ruin it, as some may think. So, you know, there is that danger of a growing far right in Ireland, especially at the moment after we have seen a lot of Ukrainian refugees come into the country. And now at the moment, there is really, I suppose, pressure on housing, and there isn't enough housing. And for people who are seeking asylum in the country, they're forced now to sleep on the streets, which is really astonishing and something I don't think we have seen in Ireland to date. So a lot of these topics are coming up and people are thinking about it. We're having discussions about it, but I think it's time to move away from discussion and for action to come about. And, you know, I think people are putting pressure on the Irish government to provide these necessities for people, for the average, ordinary Irish person, for, you know, the asylum seeker coming in, for the refugee. So the more, I suppose, we speak about it, I hope there will be more action. But it is still really a big problem in the country, and you can tell there is a lot of tension. And I don't want to be scared for the country, because I've always felt very comfortable, I suppose, in my Irishness. Maybe other people haven't always accepted it, but I've always felt Irish. You know, it took nearly 10 years for my parents to get their papers in Ireland, but I didn't know about that at the time because I was young. But for me, I always felt Irish inside of me. And I think at the end of the day, it's a feeling inside of you. It doesn't need to be a documentation. I only got my Irish citizenship or passport even when I was doing my Leaving Cert. So that's kind of your A levels, so to speak. And I just remember that moment being such a big moment for me, because I felt like finally I'm Irish. You know, it's now proven in writing that I'm Irish. But then again, people will always see me as, you know, the Black girl. They won't, even especially if I'm wearing this head wrap, they'll just see me as someone that probably just came to the country a few days ago. You know, it's not someone that has spent their whole life here. You know, at the end of the day, Dublin, Ireland is all I really know. I'm still very proud of my Nigerian heritage. You know, I do get the chance to go on holiday there from time to time, but at the end of the day, Ireland is my home as well. And I think we'll get into that discussion later on about duality and what does that mean for a lot of people like myself that have that dual heritage, that feel that they have two homes, that struggle. It's like a tug of war. And there's a really lovely poem actually written by Ijoma Ogbenio. She's a Nigerian Igbo writer, and she says, "You're too foreign for home, too foreign for here, never enough for both." And that's how I feel a lot of the time. And I think a lot of people can definitely resonate with that too. So it's really about giving a platform, I think, to minority people. I think again and again that is happening, as I mentioned earlier. In Ireland, we're having this discussion. It's quite late, but Ireland has a different history with immigration, as so to speak, in comparison, to the UK. So it is a slow progress here, and multiculturalism is slow progress in the country. But I think bit by bit we are getting there. But again, we need to take that action. And I can only be, grateful at the same time for the opportunities I've been able to get in Ireland, and to be able to speak at seminars like this. This is not something I would ever have thought of when I was younger. You never think about these kind of things when you're younger, and you feel like you're facing adversity, and you feel like nobody really maybe understands your experiences, especially through the education system. I went to all Irish schools, so a lot of the people there would be, native Irish. They would be people that maybe come from Irish speaking families, that sort of thing. So as an Irish speaker of African heritage or Nigerian heritage, I have had to kind of battle with this idea of you can only be Irish if you're white, or you can only be an Irish speaker if you have that, Gaelic heritage. And I suppose, people have said to me, you're kind of throwing the narrative on its head of what an Irish speaker is to be. And for me, I'm just doing what I love. I work in Irish language media most of the time. I love working with the language in a creative space. I'm not trying to kind of make a point in any way. I'm just being myself. So that's another thing I suppose I've struggled with, of almost kind of being seen as a pioneer or being seen as an inspiration, and which is great. And it's amazing when people, kind of adhere those things to you. But at the same time, I'm just myself, and I'm just an ordinary person just trying to do what I love doing, really. So there's a lot of things there that I would like to get into discussion more into it. But yeah, that's my background anyway. Thank you.
Great, and well, thank you very much. Over to you, Iarfhlaith. If Ola, you're ready for the discussion.
Hi, Tagamai. I'll just say a couple of words in Irish just to begin. Gurmai got Ola into Josh na fada flinchin agus tamait nugamor le vekora latinish.
Yeah,
yeah, I think maybe we could explore a little bit about being an Irish speaker, because I think that's quite interesting when you think about the history that Ireland has with the Irish language. I mean, we can talk maybe about political with a big or a small p later on, but if we park that side of it for the moment and we just think about what it means to be an Irish speaker in a country where it's so linked to national identity, and you had, clearly a Gaelic speaking country many centuries ago, but really most of the Irish speakers today learned it at school, like yourself. Like most people didn't learn it at home. They went through the education system. It was compulsory. And I think you went to an Irish medium school. So a step up from just being merely a compulsory subject to being the subject of you spoke it in every subject, I guess. Maybe like myself, even when you were reading Shakespeare, I presume there was a bit of Irish every so often in the middle of studying Hamlet or whatever, which I always found amusing. But maybe you could say a little bit about kind of personal experiences about being an Irish speaker, and if that helps you to understand Irish society, and does the Irish language kind of help in any way in terms of diversity in Irish society?
Yes, thank you, Iarfhlaith. And I love that you mentioned that Irish language is a part of the Irish identity, but for so many people, they almost see it as a foreign language. And I'm saying this about people who are native Irish. They almost see it as a language that has nothing to do with them. And that's saddening, to be honest, because I have friends who, are monolingual speakers, and a lot of them would say, oh, Irish wasn't taught very well in school. They hated the language. They wish they could have the opportunity to speak it now. And I always hear those stories repetitively, and I do feel bad for those people. But sometimes you do feel that pressure as an Irish speaker that onus is on you. And it shouldn't be on individual Irish speakers, because at the end of the day, for me anyway, I just happened to get an opportunity to speak Irish by going to an Irish language medium school from primary to secondary. And I would love that opportunity to be there for everyone. At the moment in Ireland, there is a lot of demand for parents to put their children into an Irish language medium school, and there aren't enough of those in Ireland. So that onus should be on the government, really, in terms of providing that for the people, providing more Irish language medium schools. I suppose going back to my own experience of the Irish language, it's been mostly positive, but to be honest, there's been the negative aspect too. Growing up, I think, especially back when I started going to an Irish language medium school, it was not the thing for someone of a migrant background to do so. I started in the year 2000, and again, this was like the peak of inward migration into Ireland. So my dad had just happened to get a leaflet in the door, and I was 3 at the time, going on 4, I think. And he just thought, sure, why not? And he talked to my mum about it. I'm also the youngest in my family as well. I was the only one that came to Ireland actually as well. So it was easier for me to kind of get into the system in that way of learning a new language. It wasn't a big deal, so to speak. And, the same question I get again and again, especially in my career, is, why did your parents happen to put you in an all-Irish school? And there wasn't much thought about it. It was just that, this could provide opportunities for her. This could be a way into a society that maybe I wouldn't have known about otherwise, because especially if you're coming into a new country, how do you get to know the people there? It's by engaging with their culture. So that was almost like a no-brainer in a sense, I think, for my parents to put me in an all-Irish school, because they thought that's how I would integrate well. And, there's no doubt about it that it has really provided a lot to my life and given me opportunities that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And again, from me attending an all-Irish medium school at that point, my parents were able then to kind of encourage other people of migrant background to do the same. So, there's another Nigerian in my class as well. And that kind of grew. There's more people of different backgrounds, like from Pakistan, India, Canada. Like that particular primary school I went to was very big on making the school as diverse as possible, because at this time, there wasn't much diversity in Irish language schools. And that was a very new school as well. It had only been founded in 1996. So they were able to create that opportunity for people. And I suppose there, people were able to learn as well about different cultures, different religions. And my mum would have been heavily active in that as well, in providing those services to the school. And from time to time, she would get, negative comments from other parents kind of saying like, this is an Irish language school. Why are you doing this? Why are you bringing these different cultures into the school, so to speak? So we do need to be honest about it too, that there is an air of snobbery sometimes in the Irish language kind of community, and that maybe some people on the outside don't always feel welcomed or comfortable in that community. But I think that's changing now. I think people are getting inspired in Ireland by the Irish language, because we have maybe kind of groups like kneecap music groups that are using the language in such a creative way. We have writers, we have performers, everyone trying to just use the language in whatever way they feel fit. And that's the most important thing at the end of the day, to see the Irish language more than a school subject and see it as a living language. And I think the more people outside of the education system use the language, the better, really. And nobody's trying to, I suppose, ruin the language when they use it in a way that maybe people might not be used to, in that academic or kind of maybe non-conservative ways sometimes, it's only making the language grow more and more than anything. And that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's all really interesting, and that the kind of dynamic aspect of the creativity and, you know, being, in a sense, kind of living an Irish speaker life. But for the majority of Irish speakers, they're not surrounded by other Irish speakers. So when we look at people learn Irish at school, so at the end of the day, you find that maybe 10 or 15% of the population are like you and I are, able to have a conversation in Irish, which is pretty good, like 10, 15%. I mean, they might not be quite as fluent as we are, but they can engage in a conversation. But yet in the census for decades and decades now, it says 40% of the population speaks Irish. So it indicates like a positive attitude, but it also indicates a lot of that has to do with school. Kids are learning it at school, and therefore their parents say they are Irish speakers. But you know, when they finish, they're not really. And they you know, only maybe, as I say, 10 or 15% continue on with that afterwards. But if that's the case, like the people are learning it at school, and if we look at a recent report from the Department of Education, which found that there was a lack of diversity in Irish medium schools. So the measurement was very rough. It was basically on nationality, on citizenship. And they said, in general, in Irish schools, 11% of the kids have a nationality other than Irish. I mean, some will have dual, so they won't be counting that. So they have Irish citizenship and something else. So it's only not having any Irish citizenship, 11%. You get to the Irish medium schools, it's only 1%. So it's showing a kind of a lack of diversity. And as you say, I mean, there's more and more of these Irish schools opening up all the time. At this stage, we're at, I think, 8% of primary school kids are in Irish medium schools, and about 5 or 6% are in Irish-speaking secondary schools. So it's still quite small. And you said that a lot of parents want to send their kids to these schools. There was a survey a generation ago which said that 25% of parents would say, yes, if there was an Irish language school nearby, I would send my kids there. And I think part of it might be to do with the notion that these are good schools and that there is an advantage. And, you know, so, and I wonder why it is. Like, so your parents are really extremely wise. I mean, they could see this is a good school. I'm going to send Ola to this school. She'll get the advantage of this. But why is it that other parents of kids, when they come to Ireland, do you have any idea about why they don't send their kids to Irish medium schools? I know this is like asking you to see into other people's brains.
No, thank you so much for that, Iarfhlaith. It's really difficult to say. It's so different for everybody. You know, I suppose you have to have that air of open-mindedness as well. I suppose for me growing up, you know, Yoruba, my native tongue, was very important for my parents to teach me. So I guess they find language valuable anyway. And although English is the official language in Nigeria, you know, they refuse to just speak English to me. They wanted me to have Yoruba as well, even if I didn't grow up in Nigeria. So I suppose, yeah, again, they were open to that idea. I suppose not everybody is open to that idea. Sometimes when you come to another country in very vulnerable circumstances, I suppose you don't really want that added pressure of, oh, should my child learn another language that I know nothing of? You know, that might be scary to some people. It's not everyone that might see that as an advantage. So it is really different for different people. I suppose as well, it would be good to see more representation of people of colour speaking Irish, especially attending Irish language schools. We can see that is growing here in Ireland, although it might be still very small. I even went back to my old school today to do a panel talk, and I could see that, you know, things have changed, that there is more diversity in the school, especially for kids of Asian background as well. And that's amazing to see. And I hope that only grows more and more. But because there is a lack of Irish language medium schools, maybe it's seen as they're more for native Irish kids. And I think that's wrong, because that alienates people from migrant backgrounds. Schools are schools at the end of the day, whether it's an Irish language medium one or it's not, and it should be open to absolutely everyone. And again, you see diversity in certain areas as well in terms of the Irish language schools. The school I went to for secondary school, it was in a more kind of upper class area, so there was less diversity. But if you go to schools on the other side of the Liffey, so to speak, you would see more diversity because those areas tend to be a bit more diverse. So I think it's really just about making the language seem as it's not a barrier to people. It's something that can enhance your life. If we promote it more in that way, it would be great. And I think we were speaking before about something a politician in Ireland had said about removing the Irish language as a requirement for studying teaching in college or in university rather. And I think that's really wrong. I think that would only hinder the Irish language. And this politician had mentioned this because he believed it will open up, I suppose, the Irish language to more people of different backgrounds, particularly migrant backgrounds. But again, Dublin 15 in Ireland, this is an area and it's very multilingual. And that area is so diverse. And that only proves to me that people who have different languages don't have the same hang-ups with the Irish language as people that are native Irish. So the more we give people of different backgrounds the opportunity to learn Irish, the better. I don't know if it's a case of even creating quotas. I don't like the idea of quotas generally, but if it's even a case of providing those and saying, okay, this school needs to have a certain amount of people from different backgrounds in order to help with diversity in the language, then if that's the way we have to go, then maybe that could be an idea. But we definitely need to try and make sure that the language isn't seen as something just for a certain group of society. And I do think the language is still seen as very precious and something to take care of, and which it is, but that's also alienating certain people of the country as well.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about using ecology as a concept to understanding the preservation of languages. How can you see a language in the same way as you see an ecology? So in a sense, kind of looking at it from a global scale and saying this is a language that happens to have been born on this island, but it's still part of that global diversity and important to maintain that diversity. I mean, you're talking just about the perception that there's a kind of an advantage, and I can see that the advantage of speaking Irish, the advantage of Irish language schools. And you also mentioned opening up in various, like new schools opening up in various areas. And that was one of the key things, was a kind of almost like a middle class advantage. There was a guy, Michel Péan, who lectured in Maynooth University, and he wrote a book around about 40 years ago about Ireland. And in that, he talked about I think it was the peasants and the literati. He'd said, like, there are Irish speakers who were the literati, and then there are other Irish speakers who were the peasants, like as if there's two groups of people. And I think that was seen, and that's why there were more and more Irish language schools being opened up in many different areas. But up until now, there has been that advantage that there've been mainly middle-class schools, and middle-class kids, you know, they have the advantage of the cultural capital that comes along with that school education system and their backgrounds, and they do well at school, they get good jobs and so forth afterwards. But I'm just thinking about this new advantage that's about to emerge under the Language Act, or rather the Official Languages Amendment Act 2021. And in that it says that by 2030, I think it's by the 31st of December 2030 at the latest, 20% of new recruits to the public, to any public bodies or the civil servers, anything like that, have to be competent in Irish. And I was thinking, like, if most Irish speakers come through the learning Irish at school, and if you have maybe say a lack of diversity in Irish language schools, and then next thing there's suddenly a push, a drive to recruit people into these positions, because clearly we don't have enough Irish speakers to fill that level of positions right now. People can brush up their Irish and so forth. But could that mean, like, it's an opportunity, Sal? I was going to say, is that a bad thing ahead of us, because you'll have all these kind of traditional Irish language school people heading off and taking up these jobs? But maybe look at it a different way. Is this an opportunity if it's pushed in a particular way? for creating a diversity in terms of Irish speakers in the public service?
I think, first of all, it's shocking that it's not even up to 20% at the moment for those public body jobs. It just shows really the kind of attitude towards language at a governmental level. And that's not good enough. And maybe there could be more diversity then within this sector if there is that push for 20% to be competent in Irish. But I was thinking about it just generally, the Irish language and what it holds, what the future holds for it and everything. And I'm not sure if it would really make much of a difference in terms of diversity within the language, because at the same time, people that go to Irish language medium schools, it doesn't mean they're going to actually work with the language after school. A lot of people forget about the language after they've left an Irish language medium school, and that's a real problem. And we kind of almost need to fix that or cater to that first rather than anything else. Because if you're creating these or wanting to build more Irish language schools, we need to see the benefit of it. And I'm not sure that we do after pupils finish school. And that's a real problem. And it just also almost goes back to that idea of Irish is a language or a school subject. It's just a language for school. And we've seen time and time again, obviously, that it isn't. There is such a thing as Irish language life. There are people breathing and living through the language in Ireland and elsewhere every day. Again, Irish isn't only spoken in Ireland. There are Irish speakers all over the world. I know people from Twitter even, someone that's Brazilian, he's learning Irish at the moment and he's a Brazilian native. And just look at that. There are people that come to this country and they're learning Irish for the first time as adults, and they're so interested in it. I know people from the Netherlands, again from Brazil, from China, different places that have learned the language as an adult. So to be honest, there really isn't any excuse for someone, to come to me and say, oh, I'm jealous by you being able to speak the Irish language. I wish I had it. Because if you're still living, there's still a chance for you to learn the language. Nobody's in your way. And that's something I think we need to talk about as well. There's this kind of jealousy or feeling of being threatened by someone of a different background speaking Irish. I can't tell you the amount of times that people have kind of behaved in that way towards me, seen me as some kind of threat to them because I speak Irish. I'm not taking anything from anyone by speaking Irish. The opportunity is there. We have different Irish language institutions where people can do Irish language courses and better the language, better their competence of the language. So I almost think the attitude towards the language, if anything, needs to change. That's what needs to change first. And I'm not sure if that starts at an educational level, at primary level, or what's the case. But we need to do more in promoting the language as being fun, as being able to use after school, being able to work with it, that there is employment with the Irish language. We need to make sure that people know about that, because I didn't really know about that when I was in school. I just happened to fall into working in Irish language media by chance. I wasn't aware of the opportunities that were there. So although in Ireland we live in the English-speaking world, we need to remind people that there are opportunities to use the language in your working life.
Yeah, and then I think there were more in the past. There was like a drive after independence, like over the first few decades. So I think by the 1950s, Irish was the working language in the Department of Education. I'd say now it isn't. I wouldn't swear to that, but I think that it isn't the working language anymore, and that if I was to phone up the department, it might be difficult to find someone who could answer me in Irish. But at the same time, things are changing. I was doing something with my gas bill, and when I phoned up, one of them pressed 7 if you want to speak in Irish. And I went, oh, that's new. So I did that. And the person was delighted to have the opportunity to actually deal with the customer in Irish. So those kinds of things are beginning to emerge. And I was wondering, I mean, if you were to cast your mind forward, say, another decade or more. And if you have more and more people of colour who can speak Irish fluently, who take up these jobs in the public sector, and that's seen and it's visible, can you perceive a future in which maybe the politics connected to the language, and I mean that both with politics with a small p or a big P, politics in terms of government, politics also in terms of everyday life, the politics of interacting with other people. But can you see, politics changing, the connection between the Irish language and politics changing if there are a lot more people of colour visibly speaking Irish in Irish society?
Yes, and something I forgot to actually touch on the previous question was, why are we actually assuming as well that because there's a 20% drive in the public sector for competence in Irish, that automatically people of colour will get these jobs? Because there is an actual real problem with racism and employment in Ireland. There are a lot of people that are forced to change their name on their CV in order to get a job. There is a problem of unemployment in the African community in Ireland. There's a lot of Afrophobia. People have faced racism in interviews, in trying to get a job. I know my parents as well, when they moved to Ireland, faced that discrimination and were forced maybe to do jobs that they didn't necessarily want to do, but because they couldn't get what they deserved, they were forced to do jobs that didn't suit them. And this is still a problem to this day. I've heard different stories. I remember I was taking a taxi and the taxi driver was someone of Nigerian heritage and saying he's faced so much racism trying to get a job in Ireland. So that's why, he's forced to do taxi driving, and there's nothing wrong with that, taxi driving. But a lot of people just feel like they've been pushed to the wall really in Ireland, and that they're seen as less than, in a sense, less competent, less maybe intelligent. So first of all, we need to also realize that there is an issue. And even our public sector now, how diverse is that at the moment, even without this requirement for the 20% competence in Irish? So we need to address that first as well. And then in terms of the politics, to address your main question there, if the politics will change around the Irish language, if there's more people of colour speaking it, I suppose there could be. I mean, one of the things that draws me to the Irish language till this day is just that idea of decolonisation and kind of thinking about Ireland, maybe before colonisation. And I always remember this poem by Sean O'Riordan, who's a poet, an Irish poet, one of the most iconic poets in the country, and he has this poem called Filarish, which basically translates to, kind of going back. I'm not sure if that's the best translation, Iarfhlaith, but
return again, I guess. Yeah,
return it again. Yeah, and it always sticks out to me because I learned that from my Leaving Cert, which is again like the A levels, and that was higher level Irish. And it always resonates with me because it was such a beautiful way of thinking about Ireland, in the past, before colonisation. And, some people might perceive that poem as primitive, but I thought it was really idyllic in a sense of, return back to your own, return back to, I suppose, the heritage, the culture of the country, and, forget about, maybe the mainstream poets like Shelley and Keats that you might have learned, think about what the country was like before. And that got me thinking about my own native tongue, Yoruba, and my own Yoruba culture as well, and how there's shared similarities there, just in terms of colonization and so forth. So I think the more people know about that shared history between Ireland and other countries, the better. And the better it might be for the language too, for people to feel like they can express themselves in this language in any way they want. And that whether it is with a small p or a big P, Irish is kind of, I suppose, it's radical these days, it's seen as radical these days to speak Irish, because it's seen as you don't have to, so why are you doing it? So of course, there is some kind of radicalism there in a sense, but that doesn't mean it is, a lot of people feel they want to speak Irish because it belongs to them. It's part of their culture. So why wouldn't they? So there is still this kind of idea in Ireland, like, oh, forget about the language, it's a dead language, or all those kinds of, general thoughts that some people have. I think we need more education around the language, as, it is part of the culture, it's part of the identity. Tirgan Changa, Tirgan Anam, a very popular proverb in Ireland as well. So yeah, I think there just needs to be more conversation around that at an educational level.
I'm just going to check with Niamh if she wants to open up to other questions, or will we continue the conversation?
Very happy for you to continue, Iarla. I've got a few questions that were submitted in advance and a few have been sent in, but please carry on for now, and maybe we'll stop again in 5 minutes or thereabouts.
All right. Yeah, no, just reflecting back on what you're saying, Ola, about racism in Ireland. And I mean, going back 10 years to when we had this terrible unemployment situation, and we had 16% were unemployed. And I remember there was a survey that showed according to skin color. And it was basically, if you're white, it was maybe 16.9%. So on average it was 16, but 16.9% if you're white but not have Irish citizenship. But then they said, well, if you're black, 25%. So it was so much higher. And part of that is, to do with it's a new generation of people who had recently arrived and so forth. But then one of my colleagues, Gaeilgeoir, did a research exactly what you were saying about the names. And she did this kind of test, sending out names and seeing if people could get a flat. That was a rent a flat, and the difference it was depending on what the name was. And so it was like obviously a faked up, and all fully ethically approved and all that, I should say. No ethical violations going on, but just trying out using different names and who gets called for the flat and who doesn't. And you could see that prejudice there. Yeah. So there clearly is an issue. But what had me thinking, I always try to take a positive view on things. I try and look at it like with nationalism, there can be kind of exclusive, there can be violent aspects to it, but I tend to kind of look on the other side and say, oh, it has solidarity. So you speak Irish, you become part of Irish society, and you're part of a group, and you're part of the Irish speaking community, and all this thing. There's like a kind of a glue or a solidarity that brings people together, kind of a positive thing like that. And I kind of wonder, if you have a diversity of people. I mean, look at my surname. I mean, it's not a traditional Irish surname. But if you have, so okay, I'm as pale as they can be. I'm not, as you might say in Irish, Níl Dahul. I don't know if you get that pun, Ola. Dahul meaning good looking, attractive.
Oh, yes.
So I'm playing with the word of being, I'm not a person of color by saying I'm not an attractive person. So I'm as pale as can be. So, but at the same time, I don't have that fully traditional background. I do have half and half background in terms of that traditional Irish thing. And most people don't. I mean, when you go into looking at, they might have an Irish surname, an Irish name, and therefore there's maybe an advantage there in terms of getting jobs and things like that. But when they look at their ancestries, there's all kind of diversity in there. But what I'm thinking of is diversity that you can actually see. I don't look not Irish in a sense, that traditional view. And you have faced racism on occasion. And if we have more diversity in Irish society that's visibly diverse, do you think that would then hand in hand? So you're saying like we need to deal with the problem of racism first. But I'm kind of thinking, is there a way of doing it like hand in hand with, on the one hand, you have more people of color who could speak Irish, who are there in public and visible, who are there, not even necessarily in public, but they're there when you go to do whatever you engage with the civil service or with a public body, they're there, you're talking to them. So you see them from day to day, and they're clearly fluent Irish speakers and everything. Do you think that would be one aspect in terms of countering that racism that's inherent at the moment, let's say, in Irish society?
Yeah, thank you again, Iarla. And I suppose there's a lot to kind of food for thought there, really. And I suppose I think the main thing, there's a lot of nepotism in Ireland. And I'm just thinking about a panel I was on about, I think it was for Tradfest, so about traditional Irish music and how it's not diverse at all yet. And I think it's kind of the last things in Ireland that really hasn't opened up to diversity. Well, I think that's because it's very based around family and your family name and who's your family, who do you know, kind of the famous family names in trad music and traditional Irish music. And I think that also carries out to the Irish language as well. You know, there are clearly very respectable family names within the Irish language community. And I suppose sometimes for someone like myself, you know, I don't have that. I don't have other family members that speak Irish. I'm the only one. So, you know, maybe people can't relate to me in that sense. But I think we need to really open up as a nation to people in general, to people of different backgrounds. And this doesn't only go by race, but also the traveling community as well, how we've treated them as a nation as well. And they've been recognized as an ethnic minority, with ethnic minority status rather, since 2017. And there's a lot of drive in general now in Ireland in terms of diversity and inclusion and opening it up to all kinds of people, whether it's class, race, you know, ethnic minority and so forth. So the more we do that, the better. But again, it needs to go beyond conversation. It needs to be about action. And again, I'm talking about quotas, but, you know, that's what's going to help. Maybe we need to do a bit about that, if it's in terms of Irish language medium schools, in terms of public sector jobs, and so on as well. And I do agree that, you know, we can almost hit the nail on the head with two things, you know, when we're trying to counter against racism, but also make sure that there's more opportunity for people from diverse backgrounds as well. And I'm always very happy to see that, you know, we're opening up that discussion more and more in Ireland around diversity and inclusion, but there still are some spaces that are still afraid to talk about race and are still kind of sweep it under the carpet. And I think we're very good with that in Ireland, you know, just sweeping things under the carpet that we don't want to talk about. And I think the more open we are about certain sensitive topics, the better, to be honest, as well. And yeah, I just feel that I think I am hopeful for the future. As much as I maybe have focused on some of the negative here, I am still hopeful for the future. And, you know, even my parents would say as well that things are a lot better for my generation, so to speak. And we feel like we have more of a voice as well. If someone is going to, I suppose, discriminate against us, we are ready to speak up for ourselves and to defend ourselves. And there's a bigger community as well, you know, diverse communities as well. And I just think about also the mixed race community in Ireland as well, how they have been forgotten about for many years in Ireland. And I think because there are more people from diverse backgrounds now, they also too feel comfortable to speak up. And, you know, that's really beautiful to see. And I think that's just only going to get better and better for all kinds of communities too, to just feel comfortable in their own skin. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of us didn't feel comfortable in our own skin years ago. And when you think about the crash, you know, in 2008, after the Celtic Tiger, immigrants were blamed a lot for the decline of the Irish economy. And I feel like it's happening again in terms of housing as well. So it's a dangerous line, and history is repeating itself again. But the difference is, particularly with the Irish, even native community as well, they're ready to stand up against this. And I saw that at the anti-racism protests. I think it was last month. I was at it. And so many were at it as well. Thousands. And that only made me happy to see that there is hope in Ireland for more openness and kind of togetherness as well.
Great, thank you both. I'm going to interject. It's been fascinating. I haven't wanted to interrupt you, but I do have several questions. So I'm going to put two to you first of all, Ola, if that's okay, and we'll try and group them up. So one is regarding earlier on, you sort of drew on the themes of family, nationality, and belonging. I think you said you were the only one to come to Ireland, presumably of your siblings. And I think in that, maybe you're hinting at a family spread across geographies and a sort of liminal sense of place, not feeling kind of wholly integrated in Ireland, but also not wholly in Nigeria either. And that would be a very common sentiment we've seen in history, in records of Irish migrants to the USA, to Britain, this sort of liminal belonging and the kind of not really being fully Irish because you're not centred in that place. So I wonder for you, was Irishness a tool of belonging that mightn't have been available perhaps to your parents or to others in your extended family who came to Ireland? Did you find that was a way, I suppose, to feel more wholly in Ireland that maybe other members of your family were unable to access?
Yeah, I mean, again, as I mentioned, thank you, Niamh. Again, as I mentioned, because I came here at 7 months old, so I was able to integrate into the system so easily. You know, it's different for the generation of my parents because they came here at much older age. You know, they're in their 40s, really late 30s. So it's very different then, I think, to integrate into a new society. And it was just second nature to me, really, because when you are around people and, you know, you're in an environment, even if it was a new environment and I didn't realize, it was still my environment that I could be myself in, I suppose, and one that I was used to. When I started in an Irish language medium school, it wasn't an issue. I was ready to play with the other children, and my mum always says that I was feeling very secure and I was happy there. So that was the most important thing at that stage, you know, for a child to just feel at ease and not feel different. And I think you only realize that difference when you get older and you realize, okay, I'm different from these other people around me. And then you start to question things. But obviously as a child, you're just like everyone else. And again, you know, that school was very driven by diversity as well. So that also helps too.
So Irishness, or speaking Irish, wasn't really a factor in belonging for you don't think?
It definitely was, but I didn't question it because it was second nature to me until this day as well. It's just a part of me. It's not something that it's not strange for me to have Irish, basically. I feel like it's very much part of my life. I don't know if it's, so to speak, as part of my identity because, you know, I still see myself as Nigerian and Irish too at the same time, but it is just second nature to me and very much a part of my life, yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I think we've heard a lot about, you've really brought home how Irishness is a part of your life, how it, I suppose, is a way to kind of, embrace Ireland, to feel Irish. But I'm wondering as well about the exclusionary dimensions of the language, which do have a long history. Do you think, I mean, you've mentioned some of the barriers between you speaking Irish and people maybe being uncomfortable with that. But I also wonder, do you think, is there a barrier between those who speak Irish and those who don't speak Irish that you might be able to comment on as well, and what your thoughts are about that?
Oh, of course there is a barrier between those who speak Irish and don't speak Irish. My partner, for example, is Irish and he doesn't speak Irish but would love to, and he is trying to learn on Duolingo, which is an app that really does help people these days in terms of learning different languages. But again, I think for a lot of people that don't speak Irish, they do believe there is this air of snobbery about the Irish language community, and which is maybe partly true, but again, they don't see the other side, that it is a very welcoming community, a supportive community, and one that wants to embrace all kinds of people that speak Irish. And something I forgot to even mention too was that, you know, for people in Northern Ireland as well that are Irish speakers, I often find that maybe sometimes we have a common ground, me and Northern Irish speakers, because, you know, I suppose that idea of like they have to fight to speak the language and so forth, that we kind of understand each other a bit more, and maybe they're maybe more so open to people of different backgrounds speaking Irish. And there still is a conservatism around the Irish language, I think, in the Republic. And I think that is an issue for a lot of people because they feel like that language isn't for them, then that it's only for a certain few. And I really don't want the language to be seen as something that's middle class, because I think Irish really started out as being the language of the poor. And I don't know where that's been lost on the journey. So really, we need to get back to that place, I think, of that it's just a language for everyone and it's just seen as a language. I understand that for a lot of people, it's political and it's maybe radical as well, and something that they've had to fight for their whole life to speak. But at the same time, there are people that just want to enjoy the language too, and they should be allowed to do that.
Great, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned Northern Ireland. We've also been asked about that. And I suppose it touches again on the theme of maybe exclusion. On the one hand, there might be a discriminatory dimension to people who perceive themselves and indeed are Irish, who grew up north of the border, yet their schools don't offer Irish as a subject to do. And yet, say for instance, they want to work in the public sector and you have these sorts of quotas and requirements, that is a real barrier for them to fit into the mechanics of the state. And then I suppose the other side of that is that Irish is very much heavily politicised in Northern Ireland, and it's seen to be something where a large number of people don't want actually to access at all because it's been so heavily politicised throughout history. So the question I've been asked is, how should the Irish language therefore be promoted in the discussions that are ongoing about Irish unity on the island of Ireland, especially for those who feel like it's a very heavily politicised cultural form that would exclude them in many ways. So two questions there for you, Ola.
Well, yeah, that's a really important and big question as well. I suppose, again, it needs to be seen as just a language and not something that's being used to weaponize anyone against, and just something that people are using in their daily life because that's what they're used to. For people in the Gaeltacht, for example, Irish-speaking towns, that's their life. It's part of their livelihood as well. It's what they grew up with. So you can't change that. It's something that it's part of people's identity, part of people's life. And, you know, maybe it is politicized, but at the same time, I think people have the right to do that too. Again, I think the more we show the language being promoted in a more creative way and one for everyone to speak, the better that it will be for everyone on the island too, if we are heading towards Irish unity. I just recently did sessions with Conradh na Gaeilge, which is an Irish language institution for people who have moved to the country recently, who maybe came here as refugees. I spoke with people from Syria, from Pakistan, from Nigeria. And these are adults, grown adults that want to speak Irish, that want to engage with the culture. And if they can do it, anyone can do it. You know, there's really no excuse there. So it is a language that should be open for everyone, and that a lot of people are doing a lot of work to make sure that it is. So it might be different in the north of the border, but that, I suppose that's a different story as well. But I think in the Republic, we are going towards making sure it is open for everyone.
Great. Well, you've made a very strong case there for saying it shouldn't be politicised. I'm wondering if we broaden this discussion throughout these islands and think about Scotland and Wales as well, which have their own different types of language revival movement. One's been very successful in Wales, of course, Scotland less so. I'm wondering what you think the Irish language community can offer people who are interested in reviving regional languages. So Scotland, Wales, Cornwall is another area. If you think Ireland has anything to offer, and indeed anything to avoid, any pitfalls to avoid.
Yes, again, with Welsh and Scots Gaelic as well, they're tribal languages too, especially Welsh. You know, I always admired the Welsh in terms of, you know, making sure that the language is still alive, and just that effort as well. And I think there should be some kind of coalition in some sense in terms of all the different regional languages and how we could all work together. I think there was a recent documentary made by a presenter of mixed race heritage in terms of Scots Gaelic. I forgot her name, but it was a really good documentary on the BBC. And again, that just showed the representation, for example, in those languages, which people might not have realized that they can be diverse languages too. So it's more about more representation is needed in terms of these languages as well. And I suppose maybe for the pitfalls, what to avoid, I'm not too sure about that. I suppose maybe not kind of pigeonholing the language again, that it can only be used for certain topics, that it can be used creatively and that sort of thing as well. Just making sure that it's seen as a language, and that's number one when it comes to minority languages.
Yeah, well, plenty of food for thought there. I know it's just past 1 minute past 7, but I want to hand over again to Iarfhlaith to see if you have any final comments on the discussion, Iarfhlaith, things that you think our audience should take away with them in the next, well, we'll give you 30 seconds or thereabouts. We're done within a minute.
Yes, thank you. I was kind of thinking towards the future and thinking of the language as being something like a treasure. And so no matter who it is who holds on to that treasure, so having a diversity of people and different communities, I think help with not just the survival of the language, but also the perspectives of different people of it. So what Ola had said there about the political aspect of it, and I think if you've got the language spoken across different communities and a diversity of different people, it means it's more likely to survive. But also more likely to be a way of unifying people. So I think nations and nationalism has several centuries old history, and language has often been there at the heart of it, including the thing that Ola started with, Tír gan Anam, or Tír gan Changi, Tír gan Anam. So a country that doesn't have a language, doesn't have a soul, is very nationalistic. I mean, it's that idea that each nation has its own language and we're all divided into separate nations. That's one view of it, but if it's also, we can all learn languages, so which means we can enter into different nations and we can interact with one another. And maybe that's a way of having more solidarity across the island, but also across both islands. So with Scotland and with Wales, the language is there, but not just the Celtic languages, but just a diversity of languages, bringing people together on the two islands.
Great, thank you, Iarfhlaith. Okay, well, thank you all so much for tuning in this evening, especially many thanks to our wonderful speaker, Ola. So if we can all just give our usual Zoom thanks through various emojis, which we normally do, or hand clapping symbols, and to Iarfhlaith for joining us this evening. I think Iona has posted in the chat some links. We have our website on the St. Catherine's College page, which hosts all of our past events and indeed our future events. Please do sign up to the mailing list to be the first to hear about what's happening. And of course, you can also follow us on all of the various social media platforms. But that is it for this evening. We hope we see you next week at 6 o'clock, where Dan Mulhall will talk about Ireland's multiverse. Promises to be a very exciting, stimulating conversation. And I wish you all have a lovely evening, and we will see you all again next week. So many thanks.